Nothing Personal starts in 30 seconds. It's just business. This is Nothing Personal. Mailbag. That's the Nothing Personal word of the day. It is a mailbag episode. You send questions to davidsamsonpodcast.com. You reached me at Twitter at David P. Samson. You responded to a tweet that I sent out. And some of these questions are from that. Some of these questions are just, you found me. And they were topics that were interesting. And every once in a while, in addition to So You Want to Talk to Samson, we do mailbag episodes, which is code for I'm not here right now. Let's start. We have such a busy one. So here we go. If you're not too upset at the correction, I do have a question, being a huge fan of minor league baseball. When MLB expands, how does that work for their feeder system on AAA and AA? I'm assuming there would be expansion in those leagues as well, but how would those locations be determined? Love the show and just got caught up today. Thank you. Thank you for saying and asking whether I'd be upset at corrections. As you know from listening to Nothing Personal for 1,100 plus episodes, I crave corrections. Of course, we make mistakes. It's just me and Coca every day. Sarah's there too, but we're live and we don't edit it. So, of course, I make mistakes. Let's get into this expansion thing because it's been an interesting period of time. I want to go back. Wow, I want to go back more than a decade, which I didn't realize it had been that long. But this is right around when Marlins Park opened in 2012. That park got approved in 2009. Miami was looking for a new stadium since 93, seriously looking in 97. Then Wayne Huizenga sold the team, still no ballpark. After the championship fire sale, he sold the team to John Henry, tried to get a stadium, couldn't get it done. We came in 2002 thinking we'd open the ballpark in 2005. And the reason why baseball was so concerned at that time about getting a ballpark in Miami is that Miami was the example at that time of the team that was stopping any sort of expansion conversation. Because you see, it is a pretty common thing that expansion talk is limited by owners who are concerned and the commissioner's office who's concerned with stadium deals that have not been done and teams that need new stadiums, because expansion goes into markets that would be eligible for relocation. So cut to 2014, 15, sitting on the competition committee and talking about realignment, talking about expansion. And there was a clear desire to go to 8 divisions of 4 teams of 32 teams. Of course, MLB has 30 teams, so that would mean expansion of 2 teams. There was some math done with TV deals and splitting the deals by 32 instead of 30, the math of splitting national sponsorships, and we had a presentation. Tim Brosnan was there at the time going through what numbers were and where we saw sponsorship revenue going on a national level, like the ALCS and NLCS brought to you by Loan Depot. Well, that gets split 30 ways, except a little extra went to the Marlins for naming rights. Other named deals like that, those get split. And the reason why baseball wanted to expand, and this is, remember, pre-COVID, is that there was always a view that it was the 8x4 that was the attraction in terms of divisions. And radical realignment was discussed. Now cut to, I'm out of the game, doing Nothing Personals with Coca. We're sitting in the studio in Fort Lauderdale at CBS, and COVID happens. And Coke and I get sent home on a day in March. I want to say it was March 11th, maybe the day after Gobert spit into the microphone, right around when Tom Hanks got COVID and sports shut down. And that's when Coke and I started growing our beards. Go look on Google for that. That's actually, it's in the intro video. You can see that COVID beard getting shaved off by Hugo. Shout out to Hugo, team barber for the Marlins. We love you, Hugo. Thank you for everything. You've seen it all and done it all. And during COVID, what happened is that teams had a problem. And there was capital available to teams, and that capital was in the form of debt. We've talked about this with the Oakland A's. We've talked about it with tons of different teams across all sports. When you have a need for money, there are several ways to get it. One is by borrowing, and one is by giving. Giving is when you give money to a team, and it's your own money and you're the owner. So that's putting equity into the team. One is what John Fisher's trying to do, raising equity, which is by selling shares of your team, a little bit like selling shares of stock in order to raise cash. If you need cash for something, you get the cash, but then the next day you don't have the stock. And then the last, as we said, and we started with, because it's the big one, it's borrowing money, going to a bank, having them syndicate a loan, which means a bunch of banks get together with one lead bank and you get a financing, however many hundreds of millions. Baseball as an industry does these financings all the time. There is something called league-wide debt. Boy, we're getting far away from the question, aren't we, Coca? But there is something called league-wide debt. League-wide debt is when the league takes out a line of credit and makes it available to each of its teams. When you want to access that money to cover operating losses or to cover capital improvements or to use however you want other than buying yachts and Picassos, you speak to the commissioner who speaks to the finance committee, the executive council. It doesn't get voted on, but there is information back and forth. And then MLB, the commissioner's office, has to approve you using your allocation of this team-wide facility. In the old days, it was called the Fleet deal. That's how long I go back, and this goes back. Fleet, of course, as you know, has been swallowed up maybe twice or thrice. But once you borrow this money, you have to look at what the underlying collateral is. Much like when you borrow money, when you get a mortgage, your house is collateral. When you get a line of credit, maybe your job is collateral, or maybe your stock portfolio. There are deals that baseball has that it's borrowed money using the national broadcast deal as collateral, which until the regional sports networks were a disaster, there was never a thought that you couldn't borrow against your both local and then national TV deals. I think we've all seen with the NFL and the NBA that TV deals nationally are growing and growing. And we've seen with the bankruptcy of Diamond that TV deals regionally are in danger. But in any case, during COVID, teams were getting access to capital because they had to run their club. Now, there were furloughs. There was obviously a decrease in expenses, but there were still teams without revenue. And what you may recall is that there was a 60-game season where players got paid, and you may recall that there were no fans allowed. So there was no gate revenue. So there was a ton of debt that the industry took on during COVID. And that is when expansion became even more important, because that's a way to get huge expansion fees that then get split 30 ways that are used not, as Tony Clark would like to think, to sign players or to give more money to players and increase payrolls. Expansion fees will be used in most part, large part, all parts. You can cut that however you want to pay down debt. The Oakland Stadium situation is the new Marlins Stadium situation. The Tampa Stadium situation is the new Marlins situation. And they're trying to get those settled so they can then go into full expansion mode. And remember, when you expand, it is not just the major league team that is being added. And different than every other expansion that I've seen in my lifetime, this expansion comes with not 26 union jobs per team, but it comes with the major league team, the triple A team, the double A team, the single A team, the the low A team. Let's say 4 teams at 25 is 100, but it's 26 in theory. So make it 104 plus 26 at the big league level. So that's 130. And the minor leaguers are part of the union. So we're talking about a huge increase with 2 expansion teams, 250 plus jobs. So the union, of course, is very interested in expansion. The reality is that from baseball's standpoint, there are a ton of unaffiliated minor league teams, which takes us back to the beginning when we were talking to you about the lawsuit with the minor leagues, the fact that MLB took over operation of the minor leagues, something that did not exist when I was there. The fact that MLB contracted a bunch of teams, which wasn't exactly true. They made it so there was control by baseball over the minor league teams. There was better geography for affiliates. There was, in addition, better facilities for the players, because major league teams spend tens of millions of dollars on their minor league system. It is the most expensive development situation in all of sports. Well, it's funny, Coke. I think I got to change my mind on that. I would assume that soccer spends more in development because they have those academies that kids start when they're 4. So let's say it's of hockey, football, basketball, baseball, it's the most. And so when a team is when there's expansion awarded to a city, it's really a city gets expansion, then you have an owner, and then you've got a major league team. The owner of the team, of the new team, has to take at least 2 years post-announcement to set up its organization. Part of setting it up is they will affiliate in affiliate deals like the other teams have with an entire minor league system. It does not mean that there will be expansion at the minor league level. It means there will be additional affiliates. So an unaffiliated team would become affiliated. When you ask how the locations would be determined, it's going to be for AAA, most definitely geography based. So if Nashville gets an expansion, you can look for a AAA team. Hey, I just thought of the perfect plan. I can't believe I didn't think of this before. We could do the full Aths and have the AAA team and the Major League team play at the same facility. Not going to happen. So it'll be based on geography for AAA. So if Nashville gets a team and then Vancouver, Montreal, Vegas, it'll be around those teams. That's a good question. It's coming. There will be expansion. I promise you that. If baseball went all in on being a regional sport, why did they make so many regions that had no chance to compete? I'm a lifelong Reds fan, and they ran me off about 7 years ago. How is it good for the sport to have so many franchises with no chance and no reason to root for? I sort of wanted to lead with that question. It's one of my favorite questions that we've ever gotten in the mailbag. And I got to tell you, I feel as though you may be suffering from just a wee bit of recency bias. Cincinnati Reds, I'm trying to think about the number of times Tony Perez and I talked about the dynasty that they had. Yes, it was 50 years ago, but a dynasty nonetheless. What's changed in your mind that you go into spring training every year with a team that has no hope? Other than living in the Mile High City. And that's really only recent because they had a great run, the Rockies did. They've been bad for a bit. But I'm just curious, the people in Pittsburgh who are upset, do you look at the people in Milwaukee who have now made the playoffs? What is it, 4 years out of 5? Do the people in Cincinnati look at Tampa and say, oh, you're a much bigger market than we are, bigger payrolls all the time? Do you look at their success when their window was open? In Cincinnati, do you spend time thinking about that moment when they signed Joey Votto and you were so happy that they finally signed their player that you recklessly disregarded the reality of the stupidity of that deal, knowing what would happen at the end? It's funny. Cincinnati has been in the playoffs 5 times since they last won their World Series, and they won the World Series in 1990. So 5 times in 34 seasons. That's once every 7 years. I think there's a ton of markets who would be just about okay with that. I think what you may be referring to is that in spring training, when your team is in the simulation and they are expected to lose a hundo, that you have no hope and no chance and nothing to root for. That's called the CODB. The cost of doing business is that there are always going to be a few places where everyone's really happy, but sometimes they're not. I'm thinking about Bulls fans in the 90s being really happy, and recently, not as much. I'm thinking about Astros fans and the dynasty they're currently in, knowing that they lost 100 games 3 years in a row for a period of time. I'm thinking about the Oriole fans who are not just excited they have a new owner, but are excited they're in the middle of one of their open windows and they went through quite a few years of a closed window. I'm wondering who it is that expects to be good every single year. Yankee fans? I grew up in the 80s in New York. I don't think that's what you mean. Maybe you mean Dodger fans. They're good every single year. I guess that's true most recently. That ever since Frank McCourt sold the team, they really haven't had a problem, have they? But do you think that that'll be that way every single year in perpetuity? The difference between large revenue teams and small revenue teams is the length of the open window. It is true that Cincinnati's open window is going to be shorter than Los Angeles's. But it's also true that people who live in Cincinnati know they're living in Cincinnati. For better or for worse, you know when you're in Milwaukee versus Chicago versus New York. There are advantages to large cities, large markets, large revenue, and there are disadvantages. So when you go back and you think about being a lifelong Reds fan, I don't know how old you are, but if you're my age, you got a heck of a lot of rings. And if you're my son's age, then you've had a bit of a tougher stretch, but still you've had chances in October. So there is no such thing as a sport. And believe me, this comes up in conversation constantly. Bud Selig was always big on this, and you've heard me talk about this on Nothing Personal. Hope. He goes full Andy Dufresne, man. He wants every market to have hope every year. It's delusional. It's La La Land. We would talk to him and say, how does that work exactly when the league is 500? Do you know what that means when I say the league is 500? Don't confuse that with parity. Parity is when everybody is between a 400 and a 600 winning percentage. And generally, when you look at a season, absent the White Sox, there's a few teams above the collar and below the collar every year. A couple outliers, but generally what you want in your league is everyone between a 400 and 600 winning percentage. Of course, in the NFL, when everyone's around 8-8 with a game left and people are making the playoffs with mediocrity, or in baseball, when an 86-win team, that's you, St. Louis, wins the World Series, wild card teams upset division winners. You spend a whole season winning 100 games. You're out in 4 days. See you later, Frisco 03. I get why people get upset about that. Except you're asking for everyone to have hope and you're asking for parity, which is why you see announcements from leagues all the time that try to say this is what the definition of parity is. And they go through the different World Series winners. We haven't had a repeat World Series winner since 1998 to 2000. Look at that level of economic and payroll parity. Of course, there's not economic or payroll parity. It's competitive integrity. No, that's gambling. Competitive parity. Oh, no. Competitive balance. That's the word that everyone decided on, and that's what became the tax. The competitive balance tax is named because the goal was to have that quote-unquote competitive balance where everyone is 400 to 600, and everyone goes into the season saying, we're one little streak away, we're one player away, we're one moment in time away, Whitney, something that this could be our year. Which, of course, begs the question, differentiating between good front offices and bad is recognizing when it's your year, taking advantage of it, and then getting lucky. It's something you saw a couple weeks ago at the trade deadline, watching how different teams acted, what they were doing at the deadline, acknowledging where they were, or being delusional about where they were. So my suggestion to you is I would like you, as a favor to me, and this is not just for everyone in Cincinnati, this is for everyone who listens to WKRP or watches WTMJ or enjoys going to games in St. Pete. I want you to think about your teams, think about who you choose to love, why you choose to love them. I want you to think about the lovable losers that were Cub fans until 2016 and how that world changed once they won the World Series. And I want you to decide, is there any shoe that you would be in that you wouldn't look at someone else and say, I like your grass better because it looks more green? It is something that when you run a team and run a league or run a business, you have to avoid. Everyone has, some people call it whataboutism. I don't call it that. Hey, what about if I were there? What about that situation? I really do like to call the grass is greener. And my expression is the grass may look greener over there, but when you step over the fence, man, the angle changed and it's just as brown as your grass. But look at that. Your grass looks greener. The one you're on that you said is brown. When you're standing over there, you're looking, you're like, ooh, I was wrong. It was green to start with. I'd like you to choose a fan base, any fan base. And here's the craziest part. Given the world today and the level of communication in the old days, if you were a fan of a team that was not in your market, you never got to see them. Maybe once a year at best. It's a different world now. I would like you, as a favor to me, to look in the mirror and choose a team, any team, and then get back to me in 50 years. Continuing our mailbag episode, this is a good one. Can you explain why a team would want to include a player to be named in a trade? Is it more insulting to be traded for cash considerations or a player to be named later? Thank you for asking that. All right, let's go through the facts first. A player to be named later only means two things. One, you're trading for a player you really want who is not eligible to be traded. So you call him a player to be named later, but he's been named. He's in the letter of intent, the letter agreement you have with the other team. When the trade happens, there is an identifier, and that's the trade. Sometimes a player to be named later is that in the document, in the trade agreement, you have player X for player A, B, and C, but player D is a choose player, one of the following three players. And you must name that player in a week, a month, 6 months, whatever the case may be. And if you choose to name none of the players, or if they're all hurt, then we will put a player in from pool B, players L, M, and N. So that would be a player to be named later. Sometimes a player to be named later is a joke meant to help a GM with optic eyewash. Yes, it looks like 4 live bodies for your one player instead of 3 live bodies. So there are scenarios where the player to be named later is never named, never contemplated. Cash considerations is also one of two things. Although I think for player to be named later, I think we just did 3 or 4. I have a problem with that. Side note, Coca. People who do, I've got 3 things for you. 1. And then by the time you finish, you're like, all right, what were the other 2 again? I can't remember. All right, A. And then you think to yourself, man, I can't think of what B is. So I try not to say that when I'm talking because I know my brain and I get so sidetracked that I won't ever get to B or to 2. Cash considerations means 2 things. 1, that there's an amount of money going from one team to the other, and that amount of money is being approved by the commissioner's office because it's over $1 million. That amount of money is coming over the course of years, over the course of months. Cash considerations can be in place of an actual player. And it can be anywhere from a cent to a gazillion dollars. That's what a cash consideration is. The other time that you read cash considerations is when it's $1. Those were some of my favorite trades, where you trade a player to somebody, you get back 4869. You get back. I want to get back cash considerations. But you know very well that the other team is taking on your player. The other team is paying your player's salary. You're not taking any money back. The other team said, because I'm taking this money off your books, I'm not giving you anybody. And we say, well, you won't even give us a non-prospect? A non-prospect is someone in the minor league system that no one thinks is going to make it. Sometimes the problem is non-prospects make it. One of the non-prospects is on your TV. His name is Dontrell Willis. Dontrell Willis was a throw-in in a trade we did with the Cubs in 2002. And look what happened to him. There are GMs who are risk-averse to non-prospect throw-ins because you just never know. Take a look. Here's another Marlins example after my time. Remember when they signed Victor Mesa? And then they had to sign his brother, Victor Mesa Jr., and they just threw Victor a bone to make him sign with the Marlins and paid his brother. Guess what? Victor is not playing baseball anymore, and Victor Mesa Jr. is a real prospect at AAA for the Marlins. There are examples where things happen. That trade was God, I did not remember that, Coca. So we made that trade in spring training, at the end of spring training of our first year in Florida. And I know that we had to lower the payroll, so we had to trade Antonio Alfonseca, the closer for the Marlins, and Matt Clement, a starter. And we got back Julian Tavares, who was going to go into our rotation. We gave you a bobblehead, Julian. I know you love it. We got Jose Cueto, didn't make it. Ryan Jorgensen may have gotten a cup of coffee. Where's Dontrell Willis in that trade? He was definitely traded with us from the Cubs, Coca. Am I totally? Thank you, Coca. Hold on, let me clean the wax out of my ears. So it was Willis, Tavares, Cueto, and Jorgensen. And Willis was sort of like the throw-in. And so it used to be that throw-ins were more common. And our view at that time is, hey, we just got to Florida. We're trading you Alfonseca and Clement. We need to get 4 guys. We want to make it a 4-for-2. But really, the Cubs were like, hey, we're only giving you a 3-for-2 because we're taking on all this money. And we were like, come on. Throw us a bone. Put in a 4th. They're like, fine. You can have one of these guys. How about this lefty? It'll be good for you. I remember him saying that. It was just Larry Beinfest. Mike Hill hadn't started. It was me and Larry Beinfest. And they said to Larry, hey, listen, we'll throw in this guy to look good. He's a lefty. He's a pitcher. And it's fine. And we were like, fine, we'll take him. That's really how it goes. And so now what teams do, because they're scared. They're scared. They're so scared. So you do cash considerations. It's $1. Better than doing an NP. NPs aren't worth much. They're really not. Now, why would we do this? The answer is, because you're a part of Nothing Personal. We do it for money purposes. The majority of trades are not true baseball trades. I would say Zach Gallen for Jazz Chisholm was a baseball trade that the Marlins did after I left. We may have done a couple. We did some prospect trades back in the day. We did some what we thought were baseball trades. I wouldn't even call the trade that got us the World Series and Juan Pierre a true baseball trade. There was money involved there too. There's always paying attention. You're taking on money. You're dropping money. Money is a part of, don't let GMs fool you. It's funny, as we get into deep August and through September, there's a lot of talk about how teams are built. You see a bunch of graphics that all these networks start going. They use them during the playoffs. How team was built. Draft, trade, free agency. There's so many different ways to acquire players these days, but it's so different than it used to be. And I'm being a little nostalgic because I love the days when we'd send people to the Dominican and hide a bunch of 15-year-olds so they couldn't sign anywhere else but with us the minute they turned 16. I miss the days, the Wild Wild West, when it was really based on hustle, were we to have scouts down there making $1 a day uncovering gems. There's no such thing anymore. Everything is so structured. Vladimir Guerrero, go back and look. He was hidden as a kid. He was discovered by a guy named Fred Ferreira, longtime great scout, totally hidden in the Expos system, in the Expos place, and then signed before anyone knew what was happening. Frankly, when we were doing the draft back in the day, 20 years ago, we would pretend that we weren't looking at players. We would purposefully have scouts or cross-checkers. Cross-checkers are people who go look at players that your scouts have seen, but they're cross-checking. It's like checking grammar. It's like reading something backwards to make. It's like reading something backwards to make sure there's no mistakes. That's what cross-checkers do. When you really want a player, you send in the GM or the head of player personnel. And of course, the worst thing you can do is send an owner in. So owners really look at players on tape, online. GMs don't see as many players as you think. Back in the day, you try to hide it. One of my favorite drafts was of Jose Fernandez. Totally hid the fact we liked him. We actually were telling other teams we don't see him going to us, don't like him. We haven't even looked at him in the past 2 months. I would get a memo and have a meeting where it would be players who we're looking at in the first round, and then a schedule of where scouts were and what we were looking at, how many times we'd look at a player. And there would be players who would say, not looking at anymore. This is our target. And then we'd go into full cloak and dagger mode where we would try to get teams off the scent. I cannot for the life of me understand, Coca, where we were and why I'm talking at all about what we did with players and how we scouted. Oh, got it. Landed the plane. Because back then, it was an advantage to maybe have a player thrown in, but now, not so much. So that's why it's pretty much stopped. Coca's whispering in my ear right now that Tatis Jr. was a throw-in the James Shield trade. How about that? Good job. Good bloodline. We had Fernando Tatis. I traded Fernando Tatis from the Cardinals. We got him and somebody for Dustin Hermanson, maybe him and Britt Reams for Dustin Hermanson and Steve Klein, who was a really cool bullpen arm. He married a local Montreal girl. I think he married I don't know if they're still married, a worker who worked for the Expos at one point. I loved having Steve Klein on the Expos. Dustin Hermanson was the first opening day pitcher of my career, and we moved him to the Cardinals for Tatis Jr., who was, it was Tatis Sr., of course, who was fine. He was not the guy who hit the 2 grand slams off Chan Ho Park, that's for sure. So that is why. What was that trade? It was Britt Reams. That was December 14th of 2000. I'm guessing that was either during the winter meetings, which would have been my first, my second winter meetings. First were in December of 99. Second were December of 2000. That was following our first season in Montreal. That was that trade. Wow. Memories of the way we used to be. Next question. You get a lot of heat for what happened in Miami, but could you I actually did not realize this was coming next. This is funny. Sorry, Coca. I had a brain thing. You get a lot of heat for what maybe it was in the back of my head that we were going to talk about the Rockies. And that's why I brought up the Rockies and a quip. Was that on today's? That was just a few minutes ago. You get a lot of heat for what happened in Miami, but could you touch on the sham that is Rockies ownership at some point and why they don't even try to field a competitive team? Did they ever receive pressure from the league to do such? Well, it sounds like that you're from Colorado. It sounds as though you may be friends with the lifelong Reds fan. It sounds as though you may have forgotten some of the success the Rockies have had. And it sounds as though, were you at the Hall of Fame recently when Todd Helton got put in? You haven't won a World Series, but man, Jackson Holliday's father hitting his chin, sliding into home. Game 162, World Series appearance, Jimmy Leyland, Mike Hampton. Come on. You guys have been amazing from time to time. You want to talk about Charlie Monfort and Dick Monfort? Do you really think that the Monfort brothers, now it's just Dick, Charlie's nowhere to be seen, pushed to the side? like beef. If you know, you know. So you're wondering whether or not leagues get involved with crappy teams. Let me give you a conversation that's happening right now between Rob Manfred and Jerry Reinsdorf. Hey, Jerry, your team sucks. Rob, I'm very well aware of that. Hey, Jerry, you're going to have to do better. Rob, what do you want me to do? We're losing money and we had a big payroll. We fired our GM and president of baseball operations. What? Well, Jerry, I understand that the league finishes at 500 every year, but I really would like you not to lose this much this often. I mean, Chicago's a big market. No, that conversation's not happening. The number of times I heard from the commissioner, we had some bad years. Man, we had some good years. The number of times I heard from the commissioner saying, man, you got to win more. Man, you got to lose more. Never. There is no pressure ever put. Now, are there things done with the large market and high revenue teams? Is it frustrating to baseball that the Yankees haven't won the World Series since 09? No. Is it frustrating they haven't been in the World Series since 09? You bet your bippy. Does baseball want Shohei Ohtani to play in October? Yeah. Would they have been fine with him playing for the Anaheim Angels of California, LA? For sure. Are there certain owners who the commissioner doesn't like because they didn't vote for him? Or are there certain owners who are just a pain in the neck? Are there certain teams that are troubled and problematic? Yeah, of course there are. But in terms of wins and losses, that is absolutely not going to happen. And it's funny because Coca wanted to point out the stat here is that your team started in 93 just like the Marlins. And so we would always compare ourselves with the Rockies. Marlins have 2 rings. Rockies have 0. Rockies have 5 plate appearances. 4,869. The Rockies have 5 playoff appearances. And the Marlins have 4, 1 including COVID. The Rockies have 9 winning seasons. The Marlins have, I'm going to guess, were I to guess, I finished above 500 maybe 4, 5 times, 6, 2027, made the playoffs in 23, 8, and I'll raise it up 1 to 9. Coca, confirm it for me. I'm going to say the Marlins have had 9 winning seasons, but I'd say it's 8, 9, or 10 around there. So in fact, I could say that the Rockies and Marlins have had similar lives with the exception of the big one. It can't be that the Marlins have been in the playoffs 4 times. Yeah, 2023 and R2, that's 4. Only 7 winning seasons? God, we've been very efficient then. If we're going to win, we're going to make the playoffs. We're going to make the playoffs. We're going to win the World Series. I was rooting for the Marlins. Side note, I was rooting for the Marlins to win the World Series in 2020 under COVID because I wanted to keep our streak alive. And the streak was our franchise had never lost a playoff series. We had made the playoffs in 97 and 03 and won the World Series each time. So we were the only undefeated other than those teams at 0-0, which were nobody. The only undefeated team was the Marlins, but then they lost in 2020 in the second. I think they won their first round against the Cubs and may have lost to the Braves in the LDS. That's off the top of my head. But either way, they've lost a playoff round. And then last year, of course, they lost in the wild card round. Are we the only team to never make back-to-back playoffs? God, is that pathetic. Let me firm up my jacket. For those of you not watching on Nothing Personal Live with David Samson or on the DraftKings Network, if you've downloaded this and listened, I'm in a blazer. I'm sitting in my glove chair. I'm going to sit up. I'm not going to arch my back. On behalf of Dave Dombrowski, David Samson, Larry Beinfest, Michael Hill, Dan Jennings, Derek Jeter, Bruce Sherman, Peter Bendix, Wayne Huizinga, and all the others involved with the Florida/Miami Marlins from 1993 to 2024. And I mean this. I would like to express my sincere apology for never having made the playoffs back-to-backs, not for a lack of trying, except for Huizinga 97-98. We really thought we'd make it 03-04 and then 04-05. We thought we'd make the playoffs for sure with our players like Stanton, Yelich, Ozuna, JT Realmuto, Yelich. We thought we'd make it with Hanley Ramirez and that great pitching of Josh Johnson. Ricky Nolasco. I don't apologize for the 2 rings because that's damn cool. But for only 4 playoff appearances, no, I'm not going to apologize for that either. Never making back-to-back. No, wait a minute. I'm sitting back down. I'm reclining like I'm at a table during Passover. I'm not apologizing because I've gone around the room at owners' meetings. I've spoken to fans whenever I've gone to road games. And just about every fan base at a certain point or time would trade with the Marlins and their history. Now, of course, if you ask people in Houston today, no. But if you asked Houston before this run, damn right they would have traded. But you want to know whether or not there's pressure brought to bear by the commissioner? No. Rockies ownership, sham, no sham. Do you remember why your original Coors Field was so big? Coors Field was built, and Coca, you're going to have to check the facts on this, but I will bet you $1, Mortimer, that the Rockies played in the beginning at Mile High Stadium, where the Broncos play. And when the Rockies first started, they were drawing 60,000 people to a baseball game on a random Tuesday. And when Coors Field was built, they built it huge. And then they expanded it even because Coors Field was selling out nonstop. People loved it, as they should. It's an amazing stadium in an amazing city, an amazing downtown. They had amazing streaks of relevance. Of course, then attendance faltered. Wins were hard to come by. You've witnessed in your career as a Rockies fan 2 Hall of Famers. Is it Larry Walker and Todd Helton? That's just a trivia question. I'm trying to think who else it would be. And that's off the top of your head. Thank you, Matt. I bet that's an easy one. I'm assuming it's Walker and Helton. Anyone who has that, please feel free to let me know. But let's talk about the Monforts because they do get a bad rap. Now, I could talk to you about things regarding the Monforts that would give you pause to think about what they do, how they do it, what their business is, what their beliefs are. But as owners of a baseball team, they're not exactly taking profits from the Rockies and putting it into cattle. They're not exactly taking profits from the Rockies and putting it into political races. They're not exactly funding church groups as much as they may want to. There are owners who do their share of funding things based on cash flow. I'm looking at you, Gail Benson. It is 100% true. This is a organization that has been signing big-time free agents forever. They were always in competition, but remember, pitchers didn't want to sign there unless they were overpaid as older free agents because to pitch in Colorado was to have a high ERA. To hit in Colorado was to hit well, but then you'd have park adjusted, which didn't really exist back in the day. As recently as a couple of years ago, they gave Chris Bryant $182 million. You can accuse them of potentially being bad, but don't accuse them of being a sham. Yeah, they're sort of a sham. No, they're not. Stop it, David. No, you stop it. We were always in competition with the Rockies because we wanted to be the better expansion team. Obs. And we also wanted to be better than the Rays and the Diamondbacks. Don't kid yourself. When the fact that the Diamondbacks won the World Series in 01, it was 1-1. When the Marlins won in 03, I thought to myself, 2-1. Expansion teams. Tampa 0, Rockies 0, Diamondbacks 1, Marlins 2. We're still the most successful expansion team in 30 years. Can you explain the extra complications of trading players who aren't U.S. or Canadian citizens to a Canadian team? Let's talk for a minute about visas. Let's talk about passports. Let's talk about how it used to be that we'd have to fill out the cards. The traveling secretary would have to fill out the customs cards when we were in Montreal for people who didn't speak English or couldn't write or couldn't read, whatever the case may be. We would fill out those customs cards. It used to be that when we landed, we had to give these cards with our name to customs. We had to go through customs every time in and out of Montreal. That was annoying. There are people in baseball who are U.S. citizens. There are people who are Canadian citizens. There are people who are neither. The people who are neither need to play here on visas, work visas, like people potentially in your company. Totally normal. There are thoughts and rumors that there are a limited number of visas. I never once ran out of visas, just ran out of good players. But sometimes it's used with the agent. Hey, man, I'm sorry, we can't bring you over from the DR. We just don't have the visa. Nah, we just don't think you're good enough. We don't want you here and then have to send you back. When you are traveling back and forth into Toronto to play, back in the day into Montreal, or in the minor leagues, if you're ever going anywhere to play in Canada, you have your visa and it's good for US and Canada. Now, there are examples of players who can't go to Canada even as American citizens, but they're generally criminals. So there are examples of arrest warrants, and there's examples of people who've been arrested or committed crimes or been found guilty of crimes or charged with crimes, and there's issues with child support, have that. So there are reasons why certain players cannot go to Canada. But when you trade a player, when we were with Montreal and we were engaged in trade talks, or after that, when we traded, the biggest trade I ever did in my life was with the Blue Jays, the number of times that citizenship came up, 0. The number of times that we thought about the implications of citizenship were 0. It comes up only in spring training. So here's a little nugget for you that all 30 teams do. All 30 teams during spring training, one of the days in spring training, the traveling secretary stands up in front of the crowd, in front of all the players. You don't do it in the beginning because you don't necessarily care about all the non-roster invitees. You don't care about all the fluff you have in spring training. You wait till there's been cut downs and you've got like about 34 people in the clubhouse. You say, all right, gentlemen, tomorrow, bring in your passports. And we don't do it the last day of spring training because you have to keep that note on the board for about a week because some people get confused with what tomorrow means. To me, tomorrow means tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, the day before, the day after tomorrow. Some players need to be reminded time and time again, bring in your passport. We keep a copy of it in case you forget your passport, which has also happened. So the traveling secretary gets the passport information. Then we have connections. Now, we don't use these connections for things that are unsavory or untoward. Did we use connections to try to figure out how to get Leo Nunez back to pitch for us? Yeah. Did we use connections to see if we could figure out why Leo Nunez is now Juan Carlos Oviedo? Yeah. But those connections didn't free him. We can't use connections to stop criminals from being charged. We can't use connections to lessen or lower sentences. But we can certainly use connections to say, all right, here's the roster. Any issues? When I look at this list of names, what do you see? I see a dog. That's a Rorschach ink blot statement right there. So yes, the answer is we absolutely go through and we go through each player and we make sure that they're fine, but it's not an issue. And when you're trading players, it never comes up. There's some people who ask often, and this has come up from players before when they're being traded to Montreal, when we're negotiating with free agents, they ask this question, tell me about my tax situation. But we do that in Florida. We would tell them, hey, you have no state tax, but make sure you speak to your accountant. New Yorkers say, hey, we've got a state tax, but speak to your accountant. Just so you know, there is a misunderstanding. Every single player pays taxes in every state in which they play. But if you play in New York, you just are in New York more days. If you play in Florida, you're in more days. We love to play the Rays because Marlins would get 84 162s in Florida. Get it? 81 home games and 3 in Tampa. The New York Mets, terrible. They get 81 New York plus the extra 3 in the Yankee Stadium. That's 84 New Yorks. I guess the Yankees do too. Of course, players try to be aggressive, and some of them might win. Some of them might get audited, but try to say, hey, we're there during spring training. We're there for a month and a half. That's practically 10% of our work year. 10% spent in Florida, no state tax. Wait a minute. You don't get paid in spring training. Don't bother me with the facts. I earn my money in spring training. Yeah, maybe you're per diem, but that's about it. So when you're doing taxes when you're doing trades, it's the usual. It's just business. I appreciate all your questions. We'll do this again. This is nothing personal.